Great. So we're here with Sabrin Beg of University of Delaware. Sabrin, thanks for joining. I'm here to talk to you about a paper that you recently put out with Adrian Lucas and Ann Fitzpatrick, titled Gender Bias in Performance Assessments, Evidence from Teachers, and work that you've done in Ghana. So if you could just start by telling me what the research question was that you were hoping to answer, and how you were kind of going about answering that question.
Yep. Thank you so much, Samir. I'm happy to be here and talk about this paper on the gender bias in assessments. And so our goal with this paper was to understand how teachers assess themselves, how their supervisors assess them subjectively, and that is something that's common in many spheres, not just in the education sphere. In many industries, promotions rely on assessment, self-assessments, as well as subjective assessments of supervisors. And so we want to understand how those compare with each other, and more importantly, whether there's a gender bias in teacher confidence, so their own self-assessment, whether there is a gender bias in the supervisor's view of teachers, and how subjective assessments might compare to more objective measures of output that these teachers are producing as workers. So you can imagine the school as a firm or a organization that produces some output. Output is basically the learning that students are getting, and workers are the teachers, and head teachers in a school are their supervisors. And so we want to understand both objectively in terms of output, in terms of the learning of students, how male and female teachers might differ, and also how they might differ in terms of subjective self-assessments and supervisor assessments.
And can you talk a little bit, how did you kind of try to understand these differences?
Yes. And so we measure subjective assessments. We conducted a study in Ghana in 210 public schools. These are primary schools, and our target population is head teachers of schools with primary grades and teachers of primary grades, specifically fifth and sixth grades. Um, these teachers were part of a large program. In interviews with these teachers, we asked them to assess themselves subjectively. So teachers rank themselves, their effectiveness, on a 5-point scale. And then we do the same thing for their supervisors. So we ask supervisors to rank specific teachers in their schools, again, subjectively on a 5-point scale. And so we have a sense of who head teachers think are more effective or less effective. And we also have a self-rating in terms of being more or less effective than teachers in similar schools. Um, and so that's our measure of subjective assessments. It's actually very similar to how, if you have worked in an environment where you're working for someone, how you would be asked to kind of self-rate yourself or think about self-assessment. And then we do a more sort of elaborate exercise to also measure objective assessments, objective sort of effectiveness. When I say objective, it's kind of based on a real output measure. It's based on students' test scores. And so we happen to observe teachers, students over the course of an entire academic year. And so we test students at the beginning of the academic year and at the end of the academic year. That gives us a measure of what we call value added, or how much a student learned over the year. And we attribute that to the teacher after kind of controlling for various student characteristics. We figure out what is the value added of each teacher in a school. So a teacher whose students gain more over the year. So this accounts for baseline student differences, right? So some students are going to be smarter than others. Smarter students might be in different schools. And so we account for what students know at the beginning at baseline, and we really kind of measure teachers' effectiveness objectively by seeing how much up they move from where they were at the start of the year. And so for each teacher, we have this measure of objective effectiveness, which is the value added of their class. on average over the course of 1 year. And so now we have subjective self-assessment, subjective supervisor assessments, and objective effectiveness of teachers. And then our goal was to see how these measures of effectiveness differ across male and female teachers, whether there is a gender bias.
I'm really curious to hear the results. So can you talk us through what you were finding?
Yes, so first, we don't observe, well, with what seems like a confidence gap. So we don't necessarily observe that male and female teachers think differently of themselves. We roughly kind of see the same amount of male and female teachers rank themselves as highly effective. There isn't a gender gap there. There is a significant gender gap in subjective assessments of supervisors. So when the same question is asked to a supervisor, how would you rank so-and-so teacher? A supervisor is 11 percentage points less likely to rank a female teacher as effective. And so just based on the gender of the teacher, head teachers rank females less than male teachers. And so, this could be that the female teachers are not good. And so we have a way to look at that as well, which is the measure of objective effectiveness that I talked about. And so we see how female teachers compare to the male teachers in our sample in their value added. And female teachers are actually much better than male teachers in terms of value added. So female teachers are objectively more effective, but are almost always ranked lower than male teachers by their supervisors. In that sense, then there might also be a confidence gap. So because even though female teachers are much better objectively, they don't rank themselves as higher than male teachers. They rank themselves equal to male teachers. So so that's why we think there's a gender bias, because teachers are performing better in terms of student learning. Their students learn more, but their head teachers don't seem to internalize this objective effectiveness when they're ranking their teachers. We have other evidence that female teachers are actually better, and that's from student assessments. Students actually rank female teachers. They weren't asked to rank in the same scale, but they seem to, they respond liking female teachers more, and also report that female teachers are more helpful, more likely than their male teachers to help them out. And we, lastly, just to really make sure that it is gender bias that we're capturing and not something about teachers across different schools, we also posed our respondents with hypothetical scenarios about teachers. And so we asked them about a hypothetical teacher that's not in their district, so they're not connected to them, they don't know them, about a behavior that a teacher is exhibiting. So an example of the vignettes that we post to our respondents would be, head teacher Samir is the principal of so-and-so school and gives a lot of feedback to teachers, observes teachers all the time, something good or bad that this hypothetical vignette is doing. And we ask respondents to rank their effectiveness on the same scale as the real teachers. And we varied the gender of the vignette. So for some people, the hypothetical head teacher that I just talked about was Samir. For others, it was Sabrin. And so these were kind of gendered names. In some contexts, it might not be clear that Samir is a male name and Sabrin is a female name. So we use gendered names according to our context. And we observe that there is a negative relationship between assessments of these hypothetical vignettes based on the vignette's gender. So respondents, head teachers in particular, are just more likely to rank female hypothetical teachers and school workers as less effective than hypothetical males. And we don't see this bias for teachers, we only see it for the head teachers. So put together, the evidence on both subjective assessments in combination with the fact that objective effectiveness does not align with the bias and bias in the ranking of vignettes gives us evidence of gender bias in how supervisors view the workers who are working around them.
That is fascinating, a little bit disheartening stuff. I think particularly the piece around the student rating, um, maybe not having the same direction of bias as what you found in the school leaders is something that is really thought-provoking. I'm curious, as you reflect on what you're seeing, and GSL, we work with school leaders or the head teachers in your study. What do you think the implication of your results are for organizations like mine that are trying to work with school leaders to drive kind of educational change and improvement in student learning?
Yeah, actually, I personally think, and based on the evidence that we are seeing, is that maybe supervisors, there's two things. One is this gross imbalance in the gender of supervisors. Most supervisors are male. We observe this very leaky pipeline. So about half of students are female. Less than half are teachers, significantly less than half are head teachers. And as you're going to move up the ranks, the females are no longer there. And so part of this bias could just be the gender imbalance in the structure of the organization. And that's something that we know from the context in developed countries, in that gender bias is more prevalent in industries or places where there is a gender imbalance at a particular level. And so that might need more of a systemic change, balancing the composition of genders at the higher ranks is obviously a goal that we have, many organizations have, but is kind of might require more systemic change all the way starting from aspirations of young students and as they move on to opportunities further down. Another thing that we learned from this study in particular is the importance of objective measures of output. So we don't think head teachers know much about how well the teachers are performing. They are possibly using, well, at the very least, we know they're not accounting for test score gains of students in how they view teachers. So improving data availability in schools, making leaders aware of the importance of student learning, in sort of thinking about the performance of teachers, um, performance review, and performance dialogue. These hopefully might bridge some of this gap that we observe in head teachers' assessments of male and female teachers. Kind of aligning those subjective assessments with what the teachers are actually doing in the classroom would require head teachers to, schools to be more data driven, head teachers to be more engaged in the classrooms. So that might be an implication of the findings from this data.
Got it. And as I know, this study fits within a kind of a larger study around leadership and improving student outcomes. As you look at this layer of school leaders or head teachers, what do you think are the kind of most pressing research questions to be answering for this field moving forward?
I think we understand that school leadership is important. It seems to be very important regardless of context. It might be even more important in the context of low-income countries and developing countries. What I think we would like to understand, both as in terms of scholarship, but also in terms of practice, is how we can reform school leadership. What aspects of school leadership might be more important in terms of student learning? How we can reform those aspects given the existing structures that these schools operate in. So public sector schools in developing countries face kind of rigid hierarchies. There isn't a lot of scope for hiring and firing. Incentives are not very strong. And so given this environment, what aspects of leadership can be reformed, and what are the effective ways to intervene at the leadership level such that the effects trickle down to what we care about most, which is how much students are learning and how much we can retain students in school. Because I think some of, going back to this particular paper, just thinking about the gender bias that might eventually be affecting the retention of girls versus boys in school. And so if the best teachers are not rewarded, or if the best teachers are not visible, the best teachers might be the female teachers. We want to retain them for more female students to continue in school. And so the outcomes that are at stake are many. Leadership is important, but I think we want to understand how we can reform leadership, what aspects of leadership are even possible to be kind of changed in the context of the public sector in developing countries, and how we can, what kinds of trainings or what kinds of interventions would be the most effective.
Got it. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Sabrin, for sharing your work with us and for bringing a kind of equity perspective to some of this leadership work. I think that's it's really fascinating and really important. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much.